The morning mist still clung to the towering walls of Eldrith Castle as we approached its ancient, vine-draped gates. Clara, my wife of 7 years, clung to my arm, her eyes wide with the kind of fervor that historical relics inspired in her. I, on the other hand, was here more for the fresh countryside air than the stone steeped in history. Our tour guide, a spry man with a keen eye and an enthusiastic voice, named Geoffrey, greeted us with a flourish of his hand. "Welcome to Eldrith Castle, a jewel of the Victorian era, shrouded in mystery and tales of unrequited love," he announced, his voice echoing off the stone. As we ventured into the grand entrance hall, Clara's excitement was palpable. She hung on Geoffrey's every word, her questions pouring out like a stream. I admired her passion, even as my own thoughts wandered. "The main restoration is still underway," Geoffrey explained as we approached a cordoned-off section. "Unfortunately, the West Wing, where most of the personal quarters were, is currently inaccessible to visitors." Clara pouted, her disappointment clear. "Oh, I would have loved to see where the lords and ladies once resided," she murmured. "You know, if you're really interested, I could show you some of it," Geoffrey whispered conspiratorially, glancing around as if sharing a state secret. "The restorations are just about done there, it's mostly the paperwork that's left." Clara's eyes lit up, and she looked at me, seeking approval. I nodded, seeing no harm in a peek. "Go on, I'll catch up," I assured her, my interest piqued by a collection of old war banners hung along the corridor. "I'll just have a look at these. Meet back here in 20 minutes? Clara suggested, already being led away by Geoffrey, who was now describing a scandal involving a duke and his forbidden love. Left alone, I examined the banners, my mind only half on the histories I read. The other half listened, involuntarily, to the fading footsteps of my wife and the tour guide. Minutes ticked by, and the castle seemed to swallow the sounds, leaving only a deep, unsettling quiet. 20 minutes became 30, then 40. I began to feel a prickle of something akin to worry, or was it suspicion? The empty halls seemed to whisper, their voices like the stir of leaves in the wind. Deciding to find Clara, I retraced my steps to the West Wing, only to find it silent. The stillness was almost physical, pressing against my ears. That's when I heard it, soft, muffled noises, not quite voices, not quite footsteps. They seemed to come from behind a large, newly installed oak door marked with a sign, "Restoration in Progress, Authorized Personnel Only." The noises grew clearer as I approached, now unmistakably human. My heart thudded in my chest, a mix of confusion and a growing dread tightening around it. The door was unlocked, to my surprise, and it swung open with a faint creak. Inside, the scene before me unfolded like a grotesque tableau, shocking in its clarity. My wife, Clara, less clothed than I had ever seen her in public, with Geoffrey beneath her, on an antique bed that looked too frail to support any activity. The shock rooted me to the spot, my mind struggling to process the betrayal. Anger flared, hot and fierce, but it was the cold plunge of heartbreak that overwhelmed it. Clara turned, her eyes wide, meeting mine. The guilt there could not mask the surge of panic. "James, she started, but words failed her as they did me. Without a word, I turned and left the room, the echoes of my footsteps a stark contrast to the chaos of emotions within me. As I walked away, the castle's ancient walls seemed to close in, whispering of secrets kept for centuries, secrets now joined by my own. The cool air of the castle's gardens did little to quell the heat of my anger and confusion. As I stormed through the neatly trimmed hedges, the gravity of Clara's betrayal gnawed at me, a wound fresh and deep. The castle, once a symbol of historical grandeur, now felt like a mocking stage set for my humiliation. My solitude was soon interrupted by the approach of another couple from our tour group, a middle-aged man with a keen interest in architecture, named Robert, and his wife, Sarah, who shared Clara's enthusiasm for history. They paused, concern etching their features as they took in my disheveled state. "James, are you all right?" Sarah asked, her voice laced with worry. "I'm fine," I lied, brushing off my sleeves as if to wipe away the scene I had just witnessed. Robert, not quite convinced but polite enough to not press further, changed the subject. "We were looking for the South Tower but seemed to have lost our way. Have you seen Geoffrey? He was supposed to guide us back." A surge of bitterness rose in me at the mention of Jeffrey's name, but I tamped it down. Jeffrey might be occupied at the moment. I can show you to the South Tower, though. It's not far. As we walked, Sarah's kind demeanor didn't wane. It's such a beautiful place, isn't it? So many stories embedded in these walls, she mused, oblivious to the irony of her words. Yes, stories of deceit and treachery, too, it seems, I muttered under my breath, but Robert heard. He glanced at me, a flicker of understanding crossing his face. Not just the ancient kind, I take it? I shook my head, not trusting myself to speak further. We reached the South Tower, and I excused myself, claiming a need to clear my head. As I walked away, I heard Sarah whisper, "Let's give him some space, dear." Back inside the main building, I decided to confront Jeffrey and Clara. My steps were heavy, each one echoed by the beat of my heart. I found them in the main hall, Clara redressed and looking miserable, Jeffrey avoiding my gaze. "James, please, let me explain," Clara began, stepping towards me, but I held up a hand to stop her. "No need." "I saw enough," I said coldly. Jeffrey finally looked at me, his expression one of shame mixed with defiance. "It was a mistake, James." "A stupid mistake," he said, his voice steady but his eyes betraying a hint of fear. "Mistake or not, it won't go unnoticed or unaddressed," I replied, my voice low and calm, belying the turmoil inside. Jeffrey swallowed, and Clara's eyes filled with tears. "What are you going to do?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm not sure yet, but rest assured, this isn't over," I stated firmly, turning to leave them in their misery. As I walked away, the idea of revenge began to crystallize in my mind. I would need allies and proof. First, I would seek out Robert and Sarah. They had seen my state and might be sympathetic. Then, I would gather evidence. Jeffrey and Clara's recklessness would not only end their affair but would shatter their reputations beyond repair. The shadows of the castle seemed to grow deeper as the day wore on, mirroring the dark path I had resolved to tread. The air inside the castle's library was cool, a stark contrast to the burning fury within me. I found Robert and Sarah in a secluded alcove, their heads bent over a dusty tome. They looked up as I approached, their expression shifting to concern. "James, how are you holding up?" Robert asked, standing to greet me, his voice tinged with genuine worry. "Not well, but I need to act, not wallow." "I have a plan, and I could use your help," I said, my voice steady, masking the storm inside. Sarah nodded, placing a hand on my arm. "Of course, we're here for you." "What do you need?" "I need to prove what happened, not just for the divorce, but to ensure they both face the consequences of their actions," I explained, scanning the room for eavesdroppers. Robert's eyes narrowed. "You're talking about getting evidence from the restoration room?" "Yes. I need photos, anything that shows they were there together under certain circumstances," I said, feeling a mix of shame and determination. Sarah frowned. "That's risky. If caught, it could blow back on you." "I know, but it's a risk I'm willing to take." "Jeffrey has access to the room, and I saw cameras installed for security purposes," I countered, my plan taking shape. Robert considered this, then nodded slowly. "All right. I know a bit about security systems. I might be able to help you access the footage, but we need to be discreet." We agreed to meet later that evening in the same alcove. As I left them, the weight of the impending action felt both terrifying and exhilarating. Hours later, under the cover of dusk, I returned to find Robert waiting with a laptop. "I managed to get into the system." "The security isn't as tight as it should be," he whispered, opening a video file. The grainy footage showed the restoration room. I tensed as I saw Clara and Jeffrey enter, their behavior unmistakable. Robert fast-forwarded to later footage. There was no denying what it showed. "Got it," I breathed, a cold satisfaction set. "Got it," I breathed, a cold satisfaction set. "Already on it," Robert replied, his fingers flying over the keyboard. "There. It's saved on this USB drive." He handed it to me, his expression serious. "Be careful, James. This could get messy. Thank you, both of you, I said, pocketing the drive. I won't forget this. As I walked back to my room, my mind raced with the next steps. I would confront Clara first, then take the evidence to the castle management and ensure Jeffrey's indiscretion was exposed. But even as I plotted, a sliver of doubt crept in. Was I doing the right thing, or was I being consumed by my desire for revenge? I spent a restless night, the USB drive like a burning coal in my pocket. By morning, my resolve had hardened. I met Clara at breakfast, the morning light harsh against the backdrop of my dark thoughts. Clara, we need to talk. Now, I said, my voice low. She paled, nodding silently, and followed me to a quiet corner of the dining hall. I handed her the USB drive. Everything's there. I know everything. Clara took it, her hand trembling. James, I'm so sorry. Save it. I'm filing for divorce, and I'll make sure everyone knows why, I interrupted, the finality in my voice echoing between us. As I left her there, the weight of the USB drive gone, but the burden of betrayal still heavy on my shoulders, I knew there was no turning back. The next steps would define the rest of my life, for better or worse. The crisp morning air did little to ease the tension that clung to me like a second skin. Today would be the day everything came to a head, the day when truths would shatter the facades that had been so carefully constructed. I found Clara waiting in the garden, her posture rigid, her face a mask of apprehension. The early sun cast long shadows, mirroring the darkness of our final conversation. Clara, this ends now, I began, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. I've seen the footage. I know everything. Clara flinched as if struck. James, she started, but I raised my hand to stop her. No more lies. I've already spoken to the castle management. Jeffrey will face consequences for his actions, as will you in the court of public opinion, I declared, the USB drive heavy in my pocket. Her face crumbled, tears starting to form. It was never supposed to hurt you, she whispered. It did. More than you know, I said coldly. But before I could continue, a voice called out from behind us. James, Clara, there's something you need to see, Robert said, approaching with a laptop in hand. Beside him, Sarah looked equally grave. What is it? I asked, irritation flaring at the interruption. It's about the footage, Robert explained, opening the laptop. After you left, I kept digging. You need to watch this. He played a new clip, one I hadn't seen. It showed Jeffrey and Clara entering the room, but this time, the angle was different. Behind a half-closed door, a figure emerged. It was Helen, the castle's manager, her expression one of satisfaction as she watched Clara and Jeffrey. I don't understand, I said, confusion threading through my anger. Robert paused the video, pointing to Helen. She set them up. She's been manipulating you, James. But why? My voice was barely a whisper, the implications dawning on me. Sarah chimed in, we think she wanted Jeffrey out of the picture, perhaps for the promotion or some personal vendetta. And she used your marriage as the lever. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Clara looked at me, her eyes wide with shock and new understanding. James, I was foolish, but it wasn't all as it seemed. I processed her words, the weight of my revenge and its foundations now shaky. Let's confront Helen, I decided, the need for full clarity overriding my previous resolutions. Together, we confronted Helen, who, under pressure, confessed to orchestrating the scenario to discredit Jeffrey and manipulate my response for her own gain. Her cold admission of using my marriage as a tool shattered any trust one had left in the people around me. In the aftermath, legal and professional repercussions rained down on Helen, while Jeffrey resigned. Clara and I faced each other, the chasm of her betrayal between us, now mixed with manipulation. I'm sorry, James. I made a mistake, and then I was used. I understand if you can't forgive me, Clara said, her voice a mixture of regret and resignation. I can't, I admitted, the honesty bitter on my tongue. Too much has happened. It's better if we part ways." And so, we did. Clara went her way, seeking a fresh start, and I stayed behind. The castle's ancient walls a constant reminder of deception and the price of truth. In the end, Eldrith Castle, with all its storied past and architectural beauty, became a place I could no longer bear to look at. I left, vowing never to return, my heart as empty as the halls that had witnessed the unraveling of my life.